Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Mauri. So today I want to talk about a special move in chess called En Passant. It is a move that many beginners often have problems with, and my students have often asked me, can I do En Passant in this position? And very often they ask me this in a position where it is not possible. So I want to show you exactly when it's possible and when not in this video. But first, let's have a look at what it means. En passant is taken from French, meaning while passing through. Okay, let's go over to the chessboard now, and we have a position where white has a pawn on b5, black has a pawn on c7. And let's suppose that black moves his pawn 2 squares forward. We already know that if he goes 1 forward, then white obviously can take this pawn like this. But actually, if he goes 2 forwards, white can also take on c6, just as if the pawn had gone just 1 forward. And this is the en passant move. So white just did an en passant there. And when can he do it? Well, the rule is that you can only take a pawn en passant that is going 2 squares forward and it hasn't been moved before. So this pawn on c7, we know that it hasn't been moved before because it is on the 7th rank, on c7. Another important rule about the en passant is that you have to do it right away. If black plays c5, now white can take en passant. If white decides to do something else first, let's say plays king g2, and let's say that black plays king g7, now it's too late. White didn't play b takes c6 right away, he played king g2, so now he cannot take en passant. Let's see another example, now from black's point of view. So in this position, black has a pawn on d4, white has a pawn on c2. We know that the white pawn hasn't been moved before because it is on the 2nd rank, and we also know that if it goes to c3, black can just take. If the pawn goes 2 forward, now black can also take on c3 like this, and that's en passant. So again, only because the white pawn hadn't been moved can black take. So why does the en passant rule even exist? Well, it all dates back to the 15th century, when before that pawns could only move 1 square forward. But then they were allowed to move 2 squares forward, but only from their starting squares. But they also didn't want to let the pawns off the hook that easily. So even though the pawns could move 2 squares forward, they could still be captured as if they had just gone 1 square forward. Wikipedia explains it like this: the en passant capture rule was added in the 15th century when the rule that gave pawns an initial double step move was introduced. It prevents a pawn from using the 2 square advance to pass an adjacent enemy pawn without the risk of being captured. Notice that the capturing pawn has to be adjacent to the captured pawn. Alright, now let's see some examples from the starting position. We'll play e4 for white, and we'll play a6 for black. And then we're going to play e5 for white, and now notice how white has a pawn on the 5th rank. If black now plays the move d5, then white can take this pawn en passant because this black pawn just moved from its starting square 2 forward, so white can now take on d6. And so it's just as if black had just played d6, so it's the same position after e takes d6. Except one is en passant and the other isn't. And this would also work if black played the move f5, then the same pawn on e5 can also take that pawn en passant like this. So if white doesn't do this right away, then he cannot do it later. So after e5 we had d5, and now let's say that white does a waiting move, a3, and let's say that black does a waiting move, which would be, let's say, so after a3, let's say h6. Now white cannot take en passant anymore. And by the way, in this position, black cannot take the white pawn en passant because that pawn just moved 1 square forward. So you can tell by that it can't be taken en passant. It just went from e4 to e5. All right, let's say after a3, black plays the move, instead of h6, let's say he plays the move d4. Now black has a pawn on the 4th rank, which is black's 5th rank. And white has a pawn on c2 that can move 2 squares forward. What can black do here? Well, he can just take this pawn en passant, right? Because this white pawn that is moved, it moved from its starting square 2 forward. So it doesn't matter if it goes to c3, black can take obviously, or if it goes 2 forward to c4, and then black takes en passant and we have the exact same position. All right, let's see a couple of examples now from actual games. So I played this game on the internet and I was white, and I played the move knight f3 and black played e5. So obviously I don't want to take this pawn with my knight because it is protected by the knight on g6, but I also don't like this pawn because it is a strong central pawn that controls d4 and f4. So I just took it like this. So I played d takes e6, and if I hadn't done it on that move, I wouldn't have been able to, so I had to do it right away. And black recaptured, I played knight c3, and the game just went on. All right, last example today, another of my own games. In this position, I was black, and I played the move knight g6, and here my opponent played f4. So this pawn is actually now threatening to go 1 forward to f5, and that would be a fork against my bishop on e6 and my knight on g6. So to avoid that, I just took this pawn en passant like this, and my opponent recaptured, and then the game just went on. So here we have 2 examples of why you might want to do en passant. So in this position, if white had played f3, obviously I could take like this, and then we would have had the same position as in the game after f4. Notice that that was a pawn that hadn't been moved before, and it went 2 forward, and only then can you take en passant like this. All right, so that was my lesson about en passant. I hope that clears it up a little bit, and try to do some en passants in your games. It can often help you, and so yeah, thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.